I'd like to really start by asking first, what got you onto this, into this direction? How did you find this career path? What was your journey so far? I heard during lunch break that a lot of people were really interested in this, saying, hey, we're going to have Rebecca talk from Thorn. How did you get there? How did you find it? So maybe start with you, Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm happy to share, and you may cut me off. It's kind of a long story. So I have to go back to my senior year of college. I was an undergrad at Princeton studying computer science with a focus on machine learning. And like a lot of undergrads in their senior year, I was trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. And the two obvious options seemed to be to go to grad school and learn some more stuff about computer science, or to get a tech job. So unrelated to this decision, my older sister happened to recommend to me a book called Half the Sky, which some of you may have read. It's an excellent book written by Nicholas Kristof, the New York Times journalist, and his wife. And there's a section in that book that is dedicated to the topic of sexual abuse and sex trafficking. In general, the book discusses various human rights abuses against women and children in the world. So I read this book, and I just couldn't shake the topic from my mind. So I spent some time thinking about it and praying about it, and I figured that if I was going to figure out what a computer scientist could do in this space, it would probably be a little easier to do it in grad school. And so I came out here to California to get my PhD at Berkeley in computer science, and I spent the first year or two of my program really cold calling nonprofits, law enforcement, anybody who would talk to me, asking them if you had a magic black box that could help you with this problem. And I've since learned that's a terrible user question, that there are better user questions to ask. But what would that look like? And I learned so much about all of the really excellent work that's already happening on the ground in this space with the dedicated professionals who are trying to have impact here. And along the way through these conversations, got connected to my current employer, Thorn. So my dissertation focused on what my team does today, building MLAI to combat child sexual abuse. And that was my long story. It's over now.
Okay, what about you, Kim?
Let's see, how did I get here? Oh my goodness, what a question. I have always been interested in human rights, even as a young person, even in high school, very compelled by various topics in the human rights universe. And when I went off to college, I did my capstone project on sex trafficking in China. And I could never leave it. I was a Chinese history and sociology major, and so I was just trying to really understand what was going on. But in my heart, I'm a quantitative person. I am a person that believes in evidence and data and statistics, and so it was quite frustrating at that time to work on trafficking because we just had no data. It was just really difficult to do that. And so I got some excellent advice that from a person who told me that I needed to sort of follow my path, and that not to worry, because the human rights movement needs advocates in every single discipline. And so I took that as permission to sort of follow my heart into a more quantitative field. And then by the time we got to 2019, the world had caught up, and the modern data economy actually made quantitative research in human trafficking possible that just wasn't possible before when I first got interested in the topic. And so the time was right, and we formed this lab together. So it's kind of a combination of long-time interest in human rights and commitment to human rights, but also investing in that human capital of sort of becoming, going through graduate school and positioning myself to be, a quantitative person that had the, knowledge base to then take that data that's now available that wasn't there before and actually do something meaningful with it. Yeah.
And Laura, what about you?
Well, I'm not something yet, I'm building myself. So, yeah, I did most of my studies in Colombia. I'm from Colombia. And arrived here for the PhD and got into children and parents mostly because it was something that my lab had data on, but we're trying to explore. And I just kind of fell in love with the idea of children as like these tiny creatures that discover the world and know all these things, and child development is such an exact field. Like they run these experiments, and the things we know about children is because they've made it possible. And so I was looking and learning and took some classes on child development and noticed that there's some areas that are missing and that will be possible if we have more data and scalable ways to get the data. So that's what I'm interested in, to see if all these things we know about children, does it happen with Colombian children too? Like, yeah.
So I have to ask Rebecca and Kim particularly. I mean, in your work, you get exposed to quite dark sides of human society: sexual abuse, trafficking, slave labor, and I can't help but think that it must be very difficult to deal with at times, or maybe all the time. And so I was wondering, how you deal with this? What are your coping mechanisms? Was it very hard to get into this? Does it stay with you a lot? I mean, talk a little bit, if you like, about that aspect of your job.
I'm happy to share some of that. You're exactly right, Margot. The content exposure can be difficult. It is, and I can't say that it gets any easier with time. I can't say that the topic gets any easier with time. What I can say is that there are ways to preserve your resilience. That the way that that we think and talk about this work at Thorn is that we want to be able to do it for the long term. And so what does it look like to build up that resilience to be able to do that? And for me, it looks like, trying to not be on my laptop at night to, keep those boundaries healthy between my work and my personal life. It looks like having a support network, having a community that I feel comfortable sharing the grief and the pain that you feel when you're exposed to these kinds of topics. And I think the last thing I'll add is, as a leader of a team that also, and frankly more than me at this point, experiences that kind of content exposure, it's also really important for me to be considering, how can I help them to be able to engage in this space in a way that is resilient and prioritize their wellness. And what it really comes down to is making those safe spaces where we're able to work with professionals who specialize in that kind of trauma-informed care to be able to help us make sure that short-term content exposure doesn't become long-term trauma.
Yeah, I have similar experience, and I mean, obviously, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, child labor, it's really challenging. And I carry with me, things that as a young ethnographer, trying to understand these markets, as a 19-year-old, and I'm 45 now and still think about those people all of the time. So yes, that trauma, I don't want to call it trauma, but it's really just that impact stays with you over the long haul. But I think for me, I have learned over the years to just surround yourself with people that are sources of light and from whom you can take tremendous inspiration. I work with incredible people in our lab and our partners, and they're so inspirational. So I think for me, it's very important to always remember that even though there are a lot of dark corners of the world, there are incredible people out there, very smart people, committed people with big hearts. And, I want to be in that community. And I think that that's very helpful in order to sustain over the long period.
I could also imagine that in your work, you're dealing with a lot of very highly sensitive data too, and the repercussions of getting it wrong, falsely accusing people, for example, or coming to the wrong conclusions. These are very costly mistakes to make. Can you talk about that aspect of your work? In your lab, at Thorn as a nonprofit, and also in your work. How do you deal with these kinds of sensitivities and safeguard against these possible bad mistakes that you could make, maybe?
Yes, I think that's a very important point, for sure. And one point that I'll also add to that is that when you're working in other countries, they actually may not have the same legal structure around protecting vulnerable populations that we have here. So when you're working in a lot of scenarios in which those protections and ethical guidelines don't necessarily exist, then it's on us to be stewards of that data and to sort of apply standards that we would apply here to people there and everywhere. So we have, of course, a strong engagement with our ethical review boards to make sure that our data is safeguarded. But I think really importantly, is building relationships with survivor communities. So our lab has invested a lot in trying to build those relationships and gut check everything with our partners in the survivor advocate community, right? Because when, at the end of the day, I've never been trafficked, and so I can't really say, you know, what's the best for that. So we kind of look to our partners and develop those in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I think that was beautifully stated, and maybe the only thought I will add on to that, and in addition to like what I already shared in the talk about how important it is to be practicing human-in-the-loop machine learning when it comes to decision making, is there's this concept that I've been learning about and incorporating to my vocabulary on reinforcing human rights, that human rights are mutually reinforcing. And so the right to safety and the right to privacy and the right to joy, that these are all mutually reinforcing. And so moving past this kind of binary concept of we have to pick and choose and asking, no, how can we be holistic in how we approach this? How can we be holistic in ensuring that these mutually reinforcing rights for everybody, that we're pursuing that? It's lofty and it's hard, but I'd love to shift our thinking in that direction.
Our privacy protection things are very similar to what you were mentioning. We have very tight ways of what types of, if you notice, I didn't show you real data. It was all from the internet because we protect a lot the data we have. And also this is why we thought about, in particular, the mesh representation, because it's actually a proxy for seeing the relationships without having to identify the humans. So this is why we work with these types of models.
Rebecca, you had a really interesting call to action in your talk where you said to people, hey, all of you, you know, develop me some better algorithms that will be helpful. So if all of you could advance one particular area of machine learning or data science and saying, I wish we were better at this, or I wish we were better at that, what would be your wish? So for all of you thinking about a topic in you know, for your master's or for your company or for your PhD, where is the best bang for the buck, you think?
Oh, I have a different answer, I think. We had a wonderful conversation over lunch, and this topic came up, and I'm going to advocate, I think the biggest bang for the buck is actually applying things that are simple and straightforward, that we have a lot at our disposal now, but identifying the contexts and the scenarios in which these tools can be brought to new purposes, right? So working, you know, getting out into the field, getting out into the world and understanding where are the roadblocks and where are the needs that we can actually address, and then sort of being ambassadors of data science and ambassadors of these tools in those scenarios. And you can bring tremendous value and tremendous help to people who, you know, are so resource constrained. They have such backlogs of cases and things like that. And so I'm going to say, you know, I love, you know, develop all of the fancy algorithms, but also don't forget to look for where you can find that value add with what we have now in the world with the problems that we currently have.
How do you think the WITS community could do that for you?
Oh, I mean, there's so many opportunities, right? I mean, we're like a lab that works across so many disciplines, and we work with partners in the field. So we have pediatricians, we have statisticians, we have data scientists, we have GIS experts, we have economists. Like, there's room for everybody at these tables. And so when you start collaborating, when you start talking to each other, then you can find these opportunities to bring skills together. We can't do anything on our own, right? I mean, and so building these dynamic teams is where I think the best bang is. For sure.
I think I would actually say it's more of a how than a what, if I can share that. And to me, one of the greatest opportunities right now lies in the how we develop these kinds of technologies. And so in the child safety space, we talk a lot about safety by design. And what that essentially means is when you're building this technology, do it in a way that's thoughtful, rather than kind of retrofitting safeguards after an event has occurred. And to me, the shift in culture that I'm excited to see from developers is people taking that kind of ownership to say, hey, I'm going to be creative. I'm going to recognize that there are some bad folks who are going to try to misuse this, and I'm going to be creative from the get-go in how I help safeguard from that. And that, to me, that how I would love to see that happen more broadly.
I don't have a lab, so I don't have that many opportunities to provide you. But what I will say is I've noticed the difference in research between having like a method you created for you're not sure what, but it beats some sort of benchmark, versus starting from a problem and understanding what's needed. That I think echoes a lot of what you were saying, and thinking of every time you develop methods to do them with a purpose. And that's how we create work and fund projects that are actually useful.
Yeah, I think that formative work, I think all of us are saying the same thing, and that formative work is so critical. And building those partnerships out from the beginning, right? So that, we're all experts in data science in our technical field, but other people have expertise in, sort of on the ground, frontline implementation, and we need both of those things to be working together from the very beginning as we're developing out new technologies or applications of existing methods and things like that.
So I always like to ask in panels like this, what are you most hopeful for? So again, a few years from now, we're at the WITS conference, you're coming back to talk about the latest and greatest. What do you hope you will be able to do then that you cannot do now?
I'm so hopeful just seeing all the people in this room who came here to engage on this topic. When I first started in this space, and this might have just been a function of my sample size, I didn't feel like there were a lot of technologists who even knew that this was something you could work on, that it was a problem. And so to me, it's just so encouraging when people come up and they say, oh, I actually do want to learn more, or I already knew about it and I'm here to talk to you. It's just really encouraging to see.
Well, for me, is that our things end up working, and
you get your PhD.
that would be great. But I think right now we're in this space of let's try to replicate existing child development research. But the more we talk with our collaborators, we notice that there's just they're full of questions and things they want to answer, but they haven't had that technical tools to provide them the information they need. And so from these conversations, we can see that there's such a great opportunity. So I would love to see that we've moved from reproducing existing research, like in any way, to answering questions that we haven't been able to answer before. Like, how does this behavior happen if you vary continent, if you have a cohort that's big, that if you include cultural implications in your data. Yeah.
Last word to you.
Oh my gosh, what an honor. So I will say that, in the last few years, the advancements in AI and LLMs and things like that have made tasks that used to take so much time so fast, right? I mean, just think about feature extraction from documents, right? I mean, that is a task that consumed lots of time and resources before, and now is pretty quick to do. And so, I don't think I could have predicted that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or whatever. And so, but it's really transformative for labs like ours and many others. I saw somebody else talking about the importance of administrative data streams to doing different things. So I'll say, I am most excited about the questions I don't even know how to ask yet, right? I mean, you never know what is around the corner. And so we're trying to build a lot of capacity to build a foundation for a lot of future research. And I'm not quite sure what those research questions are going to look like, but I'm really excited to get to a place where we can start to think about them, and as we start to learn about what's right around the corner and what might be possible now that it's difficult to imagine, what might be possible in the future that's actually difficult to imagine right now. And I will also say I am so happy to be here, and if I can, when we come back in 3 years, I would love to reflect on the time I came to WIDS and met somebody, and then that turned into a wonderful collaboration and partnership, because there's so much talent in this room, and I think the opportunity to just engage on all of the exciting work that people are doing is that's also really exciting.
Wow, that is a wonderful way to end this afternoon session and to go into the coffee break. Thank you so much for joining us today. Wonderful. Thanks.